appreciate you guys coming out tonight. We're talking for this Forging America program about salt and its history, and we have this massively knowledgeable guy from, appropriately enough, Saltville, Virginia, right? It's a real place.
He did not make it. Name it, I know.
Right, yeah, but it's perfectly appropriate. This is Jim Bordwine. He has been doing living history programs for over 38 years, close to 40 years now. And he used to do mounted Confederate cavalry on a horse, but he said he got tired of falling off.
Yeah, that don't hurt that well.
So the salt in his area kind of seemed to be the natural progression and a lot less dangerous to talk about. Marcia and I went to Wilderness Wildlife back in January this year, which I can't plug that enough. Most of you guys in here I think know about it, but it's a wonderful program. And we saw Jim's booth there, and so we hung around for his program, and it was so illuminating. We asked him right then in January if he could just come back this year. We didn't even know when. We didn't care. We just wanted him to come back, and he was kind enough to join us. So this is Jim Bordwine. He's going to tell us about salt in Saltville, Virginia.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. All right. How y'all doing this evening? Appreciate y'all coming out. Like I say, my name's Jim Bordwine. They call me Diamond Jim. If any of y'all happen to hear of a bunch called Hillbillies in the Holler, based out of Pigeon Forge, I'm one of the Hillbillies in the Holler. So we do a good family-based. I know some of you've got gray hair like me, remembers the Hee Haw show. We base our comedy on the Hee Haw show. So I tell folks, you can bring your grandma or your grandkids out, you ain't gonna be afraid of what you might hear. So, but like I say, my family has been up there in them mountains of Virginia, that area, since the 1760s. And what makes that area so special, there's a huge body of salt in the ground there. You know, we don't think much about salt today because it don't take nothing to get it. You know, everything you buy in the store's got salt in it. You go to a restaurant and order your dinner, that's already been salted too. And the doctors have told us for years, don't use much salt because it messes with your blood pressure and stuff. Well, the fact of the matter is you need salt. Your body needs salt to function right. That's just the way the good Lord wired us up. You need salt. And it's like anything else. The pure version of anything you can get, the better off you are. And that's what makes that area so special. Now, our history goes back to the Ice Age. In fact, it's known as one of the oldest sites in North America for human habitation, and it's because of that salt. Back during the Ice Age, there was actually saltwater springs running out of the hills, and there was a saltwater lake in the valley. And that water is so concentrated, the big animals like the mammoth, the mastodon, they could smell it from miles away. And they'd make their way through the gaps in the mountain to where the lake was, and where the water had evaporated around the edge of the lake, they'd lick up the salt. Well, the hunters what followed them critters in there, even then, man knew that salt was something very important. So they stayed there. And they would gather up the salt that had been left over by evaporation to start with, and they was trading it to other tribes traveling in there that needed salt. And it went on for years and years. Now, the reason for some of you youngins that don't know, the reason salt was so important back in them days, you got to remember, there wasn't no refrigeration back then. There wasn't no freezers. There wasn't no refrigerators. There wasn't no Walmart down the corner run to every time you want something to eat. So man discovered a long time ago, when he killed a big animal, what he couldn't eat right away, if you salt that meat down properly, it will not spoil. Now, I know most of y'all's bound to have country ham growing up, I still love it. Now, that's why that meat tastes like that. When they kill that hog, they'll cut it up, clean it really good, and they'd go in the smokehouse, have this big old box there full of salt, and they'd lay them pieces of hog meat in there, and they'd pat salt on, rub it in, and pat it on. They'd cover every square inch of surface, and that salt will draw moisture out of the meat, and it'll form a protective crust around it so they can't no bugs or germs get into it. And as long as you do it right, like I say, that meat will last a long time. Because back in them days, like I said, you didn't have no store you could run down to the corner every time you want something to eat. So they put this meat up in the fall of the year, and through the winter time, why the weather was too bad to go hunting or you just couldn't find anything, you still have this good source of protein to feed on. Because, you know, back in them days, you had to work like a barred mule from the time you got up to the time you went to bed. There wasn't no loafing around, playing games, playing on your phone. You worked hard from daylight to it got too dark to see. You might take a Sunday off if your family was religious. You'd take Sunday off and go to church. Of course, back in them days, church might last 5-6 hours at one spell, but you was there all day long taking your rest. And to show y'all how good salt is at preserving meat, there's a ham up in Smithville, Virginia. It's over 120 years old. They say you can still eat. Would you like to try some 120-year-old ham, buddy? Heck, I would if they'd give me a chance. But But that's the reason salt was so important. Now, back, like I say, the pioneers, they also used it when they killed the animal, the skin. They didn't waste it. They tanned that skin to make leather out of it. Salt was part of the process to tan hides. Of course, it was used in their cooking and their seasoning their food. But the main importance was to preserve that meat. And like I say, that's we also we don't think much about it today, but salt has really affected our civilization, our heritage. Like up where I live now, there's no natural salt licks I know of in this part of the Tennessee. I think there was a couple out around Nashville back in the 1700s. Of course, it was called Nashboro then. But up where I live, they were pretty. A lot of them, scattered through the mountains. And all it is, the salt licks place. Where we got our salt in the mountains, we couldn't just dig it out of the ground. Okay, we couldn't mine it. In fact, it's funny because I know some old folks up home says, "Oh yeah, my granddaddy worked at the salt mines here in Saltville." I said, "Well, that's nice. We never had any salt mines around here, And we had gypsum mines, which they made, you make sheetrock, which is a byproduct of salt. But there was never any salt mines. I guess the water levels just wouldn't let it, they'll dig the mine shafts for it. So what we had to do, we'd have to find a thing called a salt lick. Now, a salt lick's a place where salt naturally occurs in the ground. You can't see it. When you walk up, you can't kick a rock over and say, "Oh, look, there's salt." But the wild animals can smell it. And they'd go in there and dig and paw around, and they'd lick that dirt to get the salt, because animals got to have salt to live just like we do. If every one of y'all's families ever raised horses or cows, you got to put salt out for them every now and then. Now, the old hunters, people like Daniel Boone, people like that, Daniel Boone was a salt maker. They'd find these places, and they would dig a hole in the ground there and let the groundwater soak up that salt. And then they'd dip that salty water out and put it in their kettles. They'd pack cast iron kettles in there and build a fire. All you're doing is evaporating the water off. It leaves the salt behind. Now, it sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? What you got to realize was that wasn't civilized country back in them days. The Shawnee and the Cherokee did not appreciate us trespassing on their land. So you was literally risking your life to go get something as basic as salt. But like I say, we have to have it to live. Even today, I know they don't talk much about it today because some doctors are finally starting to admit, yeah, salt is good for you if you use it right and all this stuff. But like I say, it's just, our bodies needs it to work right. We're an electrical machine, and salt benefits that. Now, that town where I live at, the closest town, I ain't never lived in town, but like I said, it's called Saltville. Believe it or not, that is a real place. You look it up on a map, you probably find it. Now, we was lucky. There was saltwater springs running out of the hills there, like I mentioned earlier. So when those first natives that were hunting the mammoth and the mastodon found this place, they was just in hog heaven. They started producing salt. They finally figured out if they put salt water in them clay pots and set it in a fire, they could speed up the process of getting rid of the water, keeping the salt. So they started making salt. It got to be a huge, huge business for these natives, because there was other tribes coming in there from far away to trade for it. In fact, if any of y'all ever get to come visit Salt, we've got a really good museum up there. It chronicles the history of the town from the Ice Age up to modern day. And we've got there's certain types of seashells that the natives wore on their necklace they consider very valuable. The closest place those things naturally occur is Charleston, South Carolina. Those natives were traveling that far inland to trade for this salt. We have examples of tools made out of flint, spearheads, arrowheads, axe heads, stuff like that. The flint come from far away as Kentucky and plumb out into Arkansas. So like I say, they was traveling a long ways to get in there. Now, this went on for thousands of years. It was a very important place, and the natives what lived there, they become very rich and powerful by their standards. I like to tell people the old chief there at that place was like the Donald Trump of his time. He had more money he knew what to do with. Now, the name of the village back then was Maniatique. And Maniatique will say it was going really strong. It was getting big because all tribes were coming in there. Now, a lot of times there'd be tribes that hated each other would show up at the same time to trade for salt. Now, the rule is when you was in the valley of Saltville or Maniatique, you had to be on your best behavior. You couldn't be fighting while you was in the valley or you'd be banned. Now, once they got outside the valley, all bets was off. They'd go at it hammer and tongs. In fact, there's a lot of sites around there where we live at that you can find where there's been massive battles and stuff. Now, anyway, like I said, this went on for thousands of years, and they become it was very rich and powerful. They was getting huge. Well, in the 1570s, I'm sure y'all read about the Spanish soldiers, the conquistadors down South and Central America looking for gold and all that stuff. And, conquistadors weren't known to be the nicest people to the native populations. Well, they had a camp over in Morganton, North Carolina. It was called Fort San Juan. It's called the burial site today. You can look it up online. They've been digging the archaeological digger like 30 years. But the Spanish had a fort there, and what they was using that as a base to roam around our mountains looking for precious gold, precious minerals, crystals, whatever, gemstones. And like I said, they weren't very nice to the local inhabitants. And this big chief up at Manatee, he heard about these beardy-faced strangers down there in the mountains. He didn't like what he was hearing. Now, natives back then couldn't grow facial hair. If they did have one or two whiskers come out, they'd take bone tweezers pluck them out. When people like us started showing up that beard, it just freaked them out. They didn't know what to think about us, Well, he heard about these beardy-faced strangers down there in the mountains not far from Manatee. He didn't like what he was hearing. He sent word to them. He said, I want y'all out of my mountains. I do mean right now. If you don't leave right away, I'm going to come there and kill every one of you, and I'll eat you and your dogs. Now, for a native to he's going to eat you, kill you, and eat you, that's a big insult. And what that stems from, when a native will kill you in battle, they might cut your heart out and take a bite of it. And they said they thought that gave them your power and your strength and your knowledge and stuff, your spirit. And so that's what that was. Now, the part about the dogs, the Spanish raised these big old mean dogs to attack people on foot when they was going into battle. I can't remember what the breed's called now, but they were trained to be vicious. And that's how they was trained to attack people on the ground. So that's what that reference was. Well, the Spanish captain decided he could not put up this insolence out of this savage. And he marched 15 of his soldiers up to cross the mountains into Manatee. And according to the official records in Seville, Spain, he claimed he killed over 1,000 natives and burnt 50 lodges. Now, what the lodges, I know here being close to Cherokee and everything, and Gatlinburg, when we were young, all the Cherokee had these teepees set up for you to take pictures in front of. They didn't live in teepees in this part of the country. They built lodges that have like saplings in the ground pulled over and tied together in rows. They put bark and brush and stuff over it to keep the weather out. That's what they lived in. They're called lodges or longhouses. Well, he claimed they burned over 50 lodges. And in fact, these places, a dear friend of mine that used to live right behind the high school was a retired history teacher. And we could dig in his yard and find the burn marks where part of that battle took place. Find relics there. In fact, the high school that I went to school up home was built right on the main village site. And I knew old men that told me when they were building that school back in the early 50s, they said they rolled out thousands of skeletons. And back then, there was no laws on the book to protect that type of thing. People was taking skulls home for souvenirs and putting them on their shelf, And that went on for a long time. Of course, they got the school built and everything. They covered it up. But there's been times in the past where I've caught them doing work on school grounds. And I go on the site after it's over, found arrowheads, spear points. I found a bone one time, a backbone, and I just assumed it was out of a deer. Well, I showed it to my daughter's doctor. He said, that's a young lady's backbone. What are you doing with that? I went, oh. So I got some Cherokee friends of mine. We did a little ceremony, put it back in the ground. Now, one of the interesting things I found there, does anyone y'all know what a hammerstone is by chance? A hammerstone was a rock that the natives used. It was usually about that big because they'd use it to fit their hand. And when you find one, it would have like smooth surfaces where they'd use it to form those stone axes. They'd use it as a sanding tool, grinding tool. And there'd be flat surfaces on it. And then like on the middle of it, they might be a little indentation there where they're using that to peck at stakes or drive something or something. Usually about the size of your hand. I found one on that site one time. It was about this big around. And I've never seen one that big. And I got to think, I went back in one of the old history books of that area. In the 1930s, they claimed they found a cave. There's a cave there behind what's called the Madam Russell Church in Saltville. I'll get to her later. But they found two skeletons in it. The male skeleton was over 7 feet tall. And the female skeleton next to it was a mature female, but she wasn't even quite 4 feet tall. So I wonder if I found that 7-footer's hammerstone, because it had been a big old boy to handle that thing. Now, like I say, after the battle was over, the Spaniards went back across the mountain. People ask me, how did 15 soldiers kill 1,000 Indians? Well, you got to remember the Spanish had that real good armor, Spanish armor. They had Spanish blades. They had firearms. All the natives had were bows and arrows, spears. They didn't have no kind of armor or anything. Now, I'll be honest, I think the captain might have been padding his account a little bit to make himself look good. There was still a major massacre there. There was a lot of killing done there. But they didn't get away scot-free. According to the records, one of the Spanish soldiers got wounded and died and is buried over on Iron Mountain, which if y'all ever traveled up 81 into Virginia, get to exit 35, if you look right, Iron Mountain's that big mountain back to the right. They supposed to be a Spanish soldier buried up there somewhere. He died after the battle when they was going back to Morganton. Now, the valley laid empty. This was in 1567, okay, when this happened. The reason we got the story, one of the main chief's daughters was captured during the raid. And they took her back to their main village, which was down, y'all know where Paris Island is in South Carolina, where the Marines train now? That was the Spaniards' main village at the time. And I'm trying to think the name of it. It'll come to me after I leave today. But anyway, this girl, this young lady, I'm guessing she probably was 11, 12 years old when she got captured. Well, she assimilated herself into Spanish life. She joined the church, become a Christianized savage, as they said. She took a Spanish name and she married one of the soldiers what captured her. Her name was Melina Menendez then. And like I say, the reason we got this story, the Spanish governor was down in Florida in the year 1600. He wanted to know about this place. As he said, had ocean water coming out of the hills. So Melina and her husband were sent down to Florida to speak to the governor, tell him about this place. Now, the Spaniards were great for keeping records where they found precious metals, gemstones, natural resources like good water, food supplies, salt water coming out of the mountains. So they kept great records about this. And that's how we got the story. Now, when that first came out, there was a professor from Virginia Tech found out all this and bought the story out. And he caught a lot of gaff over it because all them flatlanders over in the coast of Virginia always said, oh, we have Pocahontas. This is where Virginia started. Well, we had us an Indian princess 40 years earlier over here in the mountains. And so they're still wrapping that around their heads. Now, the valley laid empty for several years. There'd be hunters pass through occasionally because being a natural salt lick, it was drawing every kind of animal in the world in there. It was good hunting. Daniel Boone passed through there in about 1750. Now, the first European settlers, that's when they moved in 1750. That's when they come in. Now, by that time, that saltwater lake had dried up and disappeared. They didn't realize there was salt there. The reason they come, it was good land. There was good timber on the ridges. There was a river running right through the valley. That's what they was after. And they were actually shipping salt in from Williamsburg, Virginia by wagon. Now, Williamsburg, Virginia is a long dang ways from where we live. Even today with a good car and highways, you're talking 7 or 8 hour drive. Back in them days, all you had was a wagon, a couple old oxen, or a couple old mules. Probably took them 2 or 3 weeks to make that trip, but they had to do it because they had to have the salt to live. Well, one day, one of the early settlers was out hunting, and he found one of them saltwater springs still running out of the hills. And the old light went off. You know, y'all know in cartoons today, when a fella gets an idea, a light bulb goes off. We didn't have light bulbs in 1750. We had candles. His candle lit up. He said, look here, we can start making our own salt. We ain't got to pay these high charges to bring it plumb in from the coast. He said, heck, we might make a little extra and trade it off down the road. So that's what they do. People would take their small, one I carry around, we call it a laundry kettle. It's about 10 gallons. People boil their laundry or clothes in it to clean them, but they'd boil salt water in that to get their salt. And, you know, man being what he is, he started making extra and trading it off, and it became a huge business all through the 1700s, up to the late 1700s into the 1800s. It kept getting bigger and bigger because more people was moving into the mountains looking for land. All the land over on the coast and the flatlands had done been took, so they was coming over here into the mountains looking for places to live. They had to have that salt to survive, you know. And it became a huge business. Now, during the Revolutionary War, there was no battles took place up around where I live. But a lot of our men fought in the war. Like I said, I've got several ancestors that fought there. Now, have y'all ever heard of the Over-Mountain Men? The Over-Mountain Men, there was a Scottish colonel in the British Army called Patrick Ferguson. He didn't care for us much. And he was having trouble trying to whoop these mountaineers into shape. They would not listen to him. And he finally got fed up. He said, if y'all don't surrender your weapons and swear allegiance to the king, I'm going to come up there, I'm going to lay waste to your land with sword and fire, and I'm going to hang you leaders. You know it's those southern boys, somebody says, hey, I'm going to come over and whoop you. You just sit there and shave, brother. I'll be right to you. We'll come find you. So that's what happened. Men from up around home started marching down through toward Abingdon, Virginia, and they got to Pemberton Oak there. They met there and gathered up. Then they went to Sycamore Shoals in Elizabeth, and they started hooking up, marching down through there, and they hooked up with John Severe's men and Shelby's men out of North Carolina. And they was going down through the mountains trying to find Ferguson. And they got down around Rufferton, and a spy come in and said, hey, he's over here at a place called King's Mountain. Now, if any of y'all ever been to Kings Mountain over near the South Carolina line, it ain't no mountain to me. It's just a little hill, but to them people over there, it's a pretty good sized place. Yeah. Are you from over there?
No, I was over there.
Okay. But, so you know what I'm talking about. So they took their 900 best shots, put them on the best horses, sent them ahead to get over there so that rascal couldn't get away. And they got over there, and the rest of the men come in, marched in behind them. Well, they called him up there, and old Ferguson was a cocky son of a gun. You know, he thought we was just a bunch of white trash pretty much. He didn't have respect for us. He said, we didn't fight like gentlemen. You know, them Britishers would stand there in a line and shoot at you, and our guys would drop down behind a rock, jump up, shoot you, and come up over 40 foot away and shoot at you again. He didn't think we was gentlemen. And he stood up there and he said, you know, God himself could not get me off this mountain. Well, anytime somebody makes a stupid comment like that, I think you better step over because lightning's fixing to hit. There was a boat one time called the Titanic. They said God couldn't sink. What happened to it? First pop out of the box. It went to the bottom. Now, so that's what happened to Ferguson. He got up there running his mouth, and the battle, if I remember correctly, the battle lasted 67 minutes. We wiped him out. Now, he's right. He's still on that mountain. He's still buried up there. But I had a granddaddy back down the line. He was a lieutenant under Colonel Campbell at that fight. And so that's one of the reasons my family's been in Saltville so long. He was granted a bunch of land along the river there for his wartime service. Now, the rest of us, most of us was already there, but that's when that branch of the family came in. Now, after the battle, people come home, still making salt because more people's coming into the mountains. All up through the 1800s. Then 1861, this thing called the War of Northern Aggression started. Yankees come there and tried to tell us how to live. Now, after the first few months of the war, we was the only major salt producer left in the South. We was supplying salt to all the southern states, all the armies we had in the field. Now, the Yankees figured what their thinking was they was some salt works down like Louisiana, places like that along the coast where there's boiling ocean water. They shut them down pretty quick. Their idea was without salt to preserve food, they can't feed their armies. They can't keep fighting if they ain't getting fed. And anybody reads your history knows our poor old boys about starved to death as was anyway. Well, I say that I'm in East Tennessee. This is a pretty pro-union territory here, so I might be preaching to the wrong crowd. But anyway, it was a rough time. I don't care what side your family was on. Now, there was a lot of battles fought up around northeast Tennessee and southwest Virginia where they was trying to get in there to us. Because like I say, if you ever get to come visit, it's a beautiful town. There's only like 3 gaps coming through the mountains to get in there. And we had pickets out at all them places watching for them. Well, they finally managed to get into the valley in October of 1864. 6,000 Yankee troops attacked the town. All we had were 1,000 old men and boys of the Home Guard there to defend it. Now, the Home Guard was men under the age of 18 or over the age of 40 or 50, I think, because they weren't considered fit for regular Army service at that time. So that's what we had, 1,000 old men and boys. One of my great-great-granddaddies was 16 years old at that fight. And that was a bad fight, but some of our regular troops managed to get in there late that evening, helped us push them out of the valley. The Yankee commander left his wounded on the field, took off back across the mountain into Kentucky. So they came back in December of that same year with more troops than Stoneman's cavalry. They captured, I hate to admit it, we thought it was our cavalry riding in the valley, let them get too close before we realized our mistake, because by that time, a lot of our boys was wearing Yankee uniforms. They had nothing to wear. They either wear a Yankee uniform or go naked. Ain't good to go naked on the battlefield, I guarantee it. So that was our mistake. We thought it was our people riding in. So the battle didn't last long. And in the records, the Yankees tried to destroy anything that could that pertained to salt making. We had these long wooden buildings called furnaces, had rows of 100-gallon cast iron kettles in them where they made the salt. Well, they tried to burn the buildings down, and the kettles, they took sledgehammers, tried to bust holes in them so they couldn't hold liquid no more. And the wells that we had had drilled since 1850 to bring that water up, originally they were digging pits in the valley to determine where the salt body was, just dip the water out. In 1850, they drilled wells. So they found out that they was dropping cannonballs, 12-pound cannonballs, and railroad iron down the wells to block them off. And they wrote in a report, they said, we've completely destroyed it. They'll never make salt there again. Well, we was back in full production in about 3 weeks. Now, I want y'all think about something. In the 1860 census, the average working man up home was probably down here too as a farmer. If he had a good year, if the weather cooperated, the crops done good, he might make $250, $300 a year. Now, $300 a year at that time was pretty decent money. You was doing okay for yourself. You wasn't living in no mansion, but you wasn't sleeping in a holler log neither. You was doing okay for yourself. In 1864, that 1 year alone, even though we fought 2 battles trying to keep them scoundrels out of there, we sold $100 million worth of salt that year. That was $1864. Me and my son ciphered that out a few years ago, and I think at that time it was equal to 1.3 billion in today's money. So I like to I travel around a lot. I'm blessed to be able to travel around a lot of different areas doing this. And I tell folks, do y'all know of a business where you live at did $1 billion worth of work last year, or any year, or even 100 million? It might happen down here with Dollywood, I don't know, but it sure don't happen where I live at anymore. So that just even I know to the youngins, 1864, my God, that's 1,000 years ago. You stop thinking, 1864 wasn't really that long ago. And at that time, I still show you how important salt was. Like I said, it's affected our civilization up around home and out through Virginia, what's now southern West Virginia, out through Kentucky and southern Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, out into Missouri. There's a band there. That's how you had to get your salt, was find the salt licks. And a lot of these things, a lot of times when people find them, there'd be towns spring up around them. There's a lot of towns there were built there because it was salt lick to start with. And, of course, the construction would sometimes affect the water flow, mess it up. Road building into these areas would mess up the water sometimes, so a lot of those salt licks are gone. All the years I ran the mountains, I only found 2 up our Riley. They weren't very big, and they was way up in the mountains. So it's not like you just go out and stumble across them that easy anymore. Like I said, originally that was what our original roads was up in the mountains. The animals knew the best way to go to the salt licks or go to fresh water. That's what the original roads was. And like I say, these towns, like I know one of the towns in Virginia, y'all heard of Roanoke, Virginia? It's a big dang town to me. Its original name was Big Lick. It was a salt lick. And I say out through Kentucky, there's several like that. I think Louisville might have been a salt lick to start with, if memory serves me right. So, and even it affects our language. The word salary, not the kind you put peanut butter on and eat it, but your paycheck from work. That comes from the Latin word salarium. That's where Roman soldiers were paid with salt for being Roman soldiers. So salt's had a big influence on our civilization. Like I say, we don't think much about it today, but it is what it is. Now, after the war, here's something you might get a kick out of. The Second Battle of Saltville took place on December 20th, 1864. Now, does every one of y'all know who Jeb Stuart was? Jeb Stuart was a cavalry commander, Army of Northern Virginia, very flamboyant figure. His brother, William Alexander Stuart, owned part of the salt works. They lived there in Saltville. In fact, the house is still there. Beautiful place. This rich lady coming and bought it, was able to restore it here recently. That's where the Stuart family got a lot of their money. Now, up where I live at, Stuart name still swings a big stick over across the mountain. Because during the Depression, they was the only family that had any money, and a lot of people would lose their land because they couldn't pay the taxes. Well, the Stuart family going in and pay the taxes, get the land. At one time, they had the largest ranch on the east coast, or east of the Mississippi. So they had something like, I think, 42,000 acres under title over there. And they owned part of the salt works, where they got part of their money. Now, because William Alexander Stuart had a really nice house, the Yankee officers was using his house as their field headquarters while they were there after the battle. Remember what I said, it's December 20th. And the story we get was that the Stuart children was afraid Santa Claus wouldn't come that year because them damn Yankees was in their house. I don't know if he came or not, I can't bet you. But anyway, after the war was over, they started up, it still kept making salt. Well, I say people still had to have salt. See, that's another thing. We live too far south. We can't depend on the wintertime staying cold enough to freeze this meat to hang it up. So like I say, salt was it for us. All through the 1860s, 70s, 80s. In 1892, there was a British company come over here called the Matheson Alkali Works, bought up the old place, and they made salt for a few years. But then in 1900, their scientists discovered by adding electricity and some basic elements into that water, they can make chemicals out of it. And we had a huge chemical industry there about 70 years. In fact, it was a role model for the world. I forget how many different countries come over here and study this layout so they go back and replicate it their kind. I mean, China was a big one. They come over here and study the chemical processes so they could go back to China and do their stuff. Now, that went on. They was making like caustic and soda and different things like that. But the most important thing I think they made in the 1950s and 60s, the Air Force had a contract there. I still remember the building. It was the tallest wooden structure in the United States. And they was making something called hydrazine. Now, does every one of y'all know what hydrazine is? You know what it is, sir?
Yeah, it's rocket fuel.
Very good. It's rocket fuel. The first man on the moon, part of the fuel that put him on the moon was made in this little bitty town up here in the mountains of Virginia. So especially when I do this at school days, I tell the youngins, I say, how cool is it? Neil Armstrong stopped my hometown filled up with gas for his trip. You're one of the few people that ever know what hydrazine was when I'm giving this talk. But they also use it in the lunar lander. It used pure hydrazine for it, and the ICBMs we had back then, that's the fuel they used. And they're using a form of hydrazine now, like SpaceX and people like that's using it. In fact, they've got a launch coming up. I think tomorrow, maybe. One of my best friends is a engineer for Musk. Is down there right now getting ready to launch. I think they're supposed to launch tomorrow if the weather cooperates. But anyway, so I think that's the most important thing they made there. Just how cool is it? A small this town. The town itself will probably fit in this parking lot surrounding this area right here. I think the last census was 1,700 people. There's one red light in the place don't make no sense to me. And the closest Walmart's 30 miles away. So when I tell people that, they really think I live in the Stone Age. So, but I like it. Like I said, our family's been there on that land since the 1760s. Got a lot of stories about that. But it's a unique place. It's just beautiful land. It's the mountains like this, you know. We ain't got Cades Cove. We got a place called Burke's Garden right across the mountain, which is another big cove in the mountains. In fact, they call it God's thumbprint. You ever see pictures up in the air? Beautiful place. Only thing we ain't got is Pigeon Forge up there, and I'll be glad we ain't, to be honest. I'd rather come down here and see it. But it's a beautiful place. Like I said, that shut down in 1970 and just about ruined the town because that was the biggest employer in Southwest Virginia at the time. So, it sat empty for a long time. Well, there's a company coming there about, I can't remember now, 15, 20 years ago, and they bought up the old works, and what they're doing, as they pump the brine out, it leaves holler spaces in the salt body, and they're storing natural gas there. I helped build the compressor station. I was one of the pipe fitters on that job, and it's the largest strategic reserve on the East Coast. There's like 10 billion cubic foot of gas stored under that town. And the ironic thing is we don't have gas service there. We got the biggest amount of gas in the East Coast. We ain't got gas. If we want gas, we got to put a bottle in the yard. I told that fellow we was building, I said, if I knowed y'all was going to do this, I'd have slipped me a pipe down the hill to tie into whenever I needed it. So that we built that place. Well, then they had a small evaporator set up to do away with the brine they were bringing up, but it would not handle the volume. So another company coming there a few years later, I think I was the first pipe fitter hard on that job, and we built them a new salt evaporator. So the company that's there now, which I think one of y'all asked me about earlier, about getting salt from up there, they're shipping about 175,000 tons of salt a year. But it all goes into industrial applications like pool chemicals, water softeners. Hanes underwear buys it, or used to. I guess they still do, because if y'all remember when we was young, first time you washed your colored shirt, it faded. Well, they put that salt into the dyeing process and said the color's good. That's why your clothes don't fade like they used to. Morton Salt buys salt from up there, but they junk it up before they put it on the shelf for the consumer. So it's a big thing. I'm about the only way to get any good eating salt from Saltville. I've got access to the facility. Don't mention that to the wrong people. They might not want me coming up there no more, but I helped build it, so I got a lot of friends there. But this salt, now the thing about salt, regular store-bought salt has been bleached. It's been iodized. Now, back in the old days, they did iodine here in the mountains because some of y'all may remember, some of the older folks get that growth on their neck, goiter they called it, and it was lack of iodine. It was pituitary or the thyroid one, I can't remember which one, but they caused this huge growth on their neck, and there's some lack of iodine in your diet. Well, the only natural source of iodine is fresh seafood. We're a long dang ways from the ocean to be getting fresh seafood over here. But nowadays, I'm sure you get enough supplements and everything else, you don't need it as much. And there's people even allergic to iodine now. So I sell some of my salt I sell to a couple of health food stores up home because these people wants the salt without the iodine in it. So like I said, regular salt, like I say, plus it's got a bunch of fillers in it. It's got sugar, it's got flour, it's got clay in it sometimes, all kinds of junky fillers. From the research I've read, that's what messes with your health. And yourself, your regular salt, you sit there forever trying to shake it out before you can taste it. It ain't no good for you. So a lot of people have gone to using sea salt. Now, the thing you got to think about sea salt, number one, there's a lot of nasty stuff in the ocean. We ain't got the technology to filter out of water. Number two, they're finding microparticles of plastic in sea salt and all the trash in the ocean breaking down. Now, folks, we get enough junk in our diets as it is without adding that to it. And the ocean's so dirty, I have no desire to go in it. If I want to be honest, Steven Spielberg ruined that for me back in '77 when the Jaws come out. I still don't like to swim in the ocean. But another thing you got to worry about too, Y'all remember a few years ago, Japan had that big earthquake, that Fukushima reactor released into the ocean. Well, they're finding traces of radiation over on the left coast now. So there's like a lot of junk out there we don't need. And I've had people say, well, I use that nice pink Himalayan salt. Well, the thing about Himalayan salt, it don't come from Himalayas, it comes from Pakistan. Pakistan, unfortunately, ain't known for their quality control over there, and they're finding traces of heavy metals in that salt now. So, I mean, you may have to eat a truckload of it before it affects you, but still, I don't want heavy metals in my food if I know about it. Now, there's a salt on the market which gets a lot of hype called Redmond salt out of Utah. They mine it out there, which it's got a lot of natural minerals in it, but you get down to the bottom list, there's 2 heavy metals in it. And I asked one, I a lot of these prepper and survivor shows hired me to come out and talk about salt, teach about preserving with it and stuff. And I asked the representative, I said, what's this about these heavy metals? Oh, it's inert, he said. I don't care what it's called. It's still heavy metals. I don't want it in my food, you know? So anyway, but the salt we're doing up home, it comes from protected source there in the mountains. We test every batch we run. It comes out at least 99.75% pure. I've got several people that tells me their blood pressure's improved since they quit using regular salt and went to this. Even had one man over Kentucky said his acid reflux went away after he quit using regular salt and started eating this. So it's just one of them things. It's like anything. You get the purer you can get, the better off you are. Now here's a little trivia for you. What's one of the most pure foods in the world will never go bad? Natural food. Very good. They have found honey in Egyptian sarcophagus. It was 2,000 and 3,000 years old. It's still edible. So. And of course, honey back in the old days, that was used for lots of things. You just treat wounds, you know, all kinds of stuff. It ain't just good to eat on a hot butter biscuit. So, I can't think of nothing else. I know I've jumped around like a Mexican jumping bean here with the way I talk, tell my story, but has anybody got any questions or any comments or anything? Yes, ma'am.
What about the concentration?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, I know most of y'all swum in the ocean before. You know how salty that water feels, gets your nose and your eyeballs and stuff? Well, the water we're getting out of the ground up home is 10 times saltier than ocean water. It's equal to the Great Lakes, the Great Salt Lake, or the Dead Sea. It's like 23, 25% salinity levels. So when I'm doing my thing, I can average about 2.5 pounds of salt per gallon of water. It's that salty. In fact, when my mama was growing up in the 50s, they had a swimming pool in that town near us, and that's the water they used in it. And you didn't have to be able to swim because you can't sink in the darn stuff. But if you got a scratch or scrape on your body somewhere, you're going to find it real quick. It'll light you up. But like I said, I told you, when we test it, it comes out at least 99.75. Sometimes it goes as high as 99.99% pure. And the only other fraction of a percent of anything is calcium chloride, which they tell me is dead salt. I guess that's what the gypsum is. It turns into gypsum. That's, like I say, because of that high purity, it's good for you. I was up in Richmond, Virginia doing a festival I'd done for several years, and this lady walked up. She bought salt from me before, and she said, you lied to me. Boy, I'll call you back. I said, what I lied to you about? Her husband's back there laughing. He said, tell him what you done. She said, well, I forgot what you said about this not taking near as much to season with. And he said, buddy, he said, them beans was so salty, I thought they was going to crawl to the pot by themselves. They wouldn't have eaten some. Anyway, anything else you think about Miss Wolfenberg?
Well, you had a really good explanation back in January about a gallon of seawater versus a gallon of like salty seawater versus a gallon of pure salt water.
Yeah.
And that concentration in the weight. Yeah,
like I say, all right, a gallon of fresh water weighs 8.3 pounds. Now, seawater, even though it feels salty when it gets in your eyes and stuff, it's only about 2.5%, 3% salinity. Now, you can boil seawater if it comes down to it and that's all you got, yeah, but you're going to be boiling a lot of it to get anything. And like I say, the water over at home is 10 times saltier. So a gallon of my water weighs right at 11 pounds. So it's, yes, sir.
What is the smoked salt?
That's just something people put it in smokers. They actually spread the salt out in there, and it's really good. I've never tried it myself. The only salt flavors I've done some garlic salt with my salt and a couple basic things like that, just experimenting around. But a friend of mine took some of my salt and smoked it. Oh my goodness, it was good. But they put it in an actual smoker, and she wouldn't tell me what different types of wood she used to give it the flavor it did. But that's all that is. That's one thing, I was talking about the different types of salt and the purity of it. There's a lot of very expensive salts out there people like to buy for the different flavors and stuff. One thing you want to make sure of, you deal with a reputable dealer on this, because there's some scallywags out there with take regular salt and put food coloring and flavoring in it to make it to mimic this high dollar stuff. So, I'm saying just be careful what you buy. If you're buying that high dollar stuff, make sure it's a good deal. Or, son, I'll call you back. Stop that. He probably got lost before his way home, knowing him. Only 28 years old. But like I say, there's so much out there it affects. And there's a lady over in Kentucky I'm selling salt to now. She's doing different herbs and stuff. She did a applewood salt. And, oh, man, you talk about good, great day in the morning. In fact, I think I had somebody out there at Wilderness Wildlife this week. It didn't last long. It did not last long. So, but that's how they smoke the salt. They just like they smoke meat. They just put it in there in the container and let it. I don't know how long they have to let it sit, but it gives it a really good flavor. The ones I've tried were really good anyway. Yes, sir.
I'd like for you to say a few words about the product called No Salt.
I don't know what to tell you about that. I tell you, there's a man-made salt on the market. Is that what you're talking about?
It's lower or no sodium. It's supposed to season your food, but without all the sodium.
I don't know enough about it to give you a sensible answer, sir. Now, the only salt substitute I like that you can buy in stores is Mrs. Dash because it uses all the different herbs and stuff. I really like it. But that's something else. There's a man-made salt on the market too, where they're actually combining the sodium and the chloride, and for some reason it's not good for you. The research I've read, it's not the way it bonds or something. It's not doing like nature does, and it's just not good for you. It's not good for you. So that's something else I tend to stay away from. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better answer, but I don't know enough about it to say. But like I say, there are substitutes out there. I'll say Mrs. Dash is the one I like. Yes, ma'am.
What is pink salt?
That's what I was talking about earlier. It's that Himalayan salt they talk about, but it don't come from Himalayas. Like I say, it comes from Pakistan, and they've been finding. No, it comes out of the ground pink. Well, some of it does. I'm sure they're dyeing some of it, but like I say, it's got traces of heavy metals in it. So I'm leery of it. And the heck of it is, I like it on like when you're barbecuing, cooking meat on a grill. I think that pink salt tastes great on it. But after I found out that they're starting to find heavy metals in it, I ain't going to eat no more of it if I can help it. Yes, ma'am.
My grandmother was in her 80s and she was hospitalized because she didn't have enough salt in her.
Exactly. Yes, ma'am. I've got a lot of folks come to me, says their doctor told them they're low in their diet, and they'll just take that salt I sell and say, look, overdo it really. I've got people even buys it to, they'll put a spoonful of it in water, a cup of water, and drink it for the electrolytes and stuff. And I've got some good friends who were soldiers over in Afghanistan and Iraq and places, and the intense heat sapped their salt body so bad of the minerals, the doctor told them, said, find the purest salt you can and overdo it really. So I'll make sure I keep them boys supplied best I can so they've got something to try to bring their health back. But I said, those times back in 1800s, the shortage of salt really caused problems. They was during the war. I know over in Asheville, there was a riot. The women rioted over there because they didn't get their supply of salt. And one of the ways they would try to supplement that, if y'all want to hear this, there's two ways I think good to preserve meat, salt and meat. There's two methods that I think, now you can go on the internet and find all kinds of methods. The two that I know that I've used and I guarantee will work, the first that I mentioned earlier where the old timers would cut the hog up or whatever animal, go in there and lay it in that box of salt and put the meat, cover it and make sure you got to cover every bit of it. You can't leave one little place exposed or you're ruined. Now, another method is because, be honest, how many of us have got a smokehouse in the backyard anymore? So another good method, which I think works better for people today, you can take a crock or a barrel, you put like an inch or so of salt in the bottom of it, cut your meat into small portions, and layer that meat on the salt so it's not touching each other or touching the sides of the container. You put another layer of salt on, just keep building all the way up till you fill the container. And then like if you used a barrel, they put the head in the barrel. That's why they used to, when the ships go out to sail, they'd have salt pork, salt beef, salt fish down. And or you could, if you're doing it in the crock, once you get it full, you can put like a cheesecloth over it, lay a board over it, put it back in a cool, dry place. And that, like I say, there's a ham in Virginia. It's over 120 years old. It's going to outlast, if you salt that meat properly, it's going to outlast every one of us here, I guarantee it. And it ain't like you can put it in there one day, the next day it's cured. It takes a few months or so for the meat to completely cure. But once it does, you're set. You're good to go.